Have you ever noticed that people who grew up in the 1990s seem to move through the world a little differently? Not louder, not faster, just steadier. It's like they're comfortable being present but not uncomfortable with change, and that balance didn't happen by accident. People who grew up in the 1990s were shaped by a very specific psychological environment, one that doesn't exist anymore. Their childhood happened mostly offline. Moments weren't documented automatically. Memories weren't constantly captured, shared, or judged. If something mattered, you remembered it, not because it was saved, but because it lived in you. That taught a subtle form of presence. You paid attention because you had to. You watched closely because there was no rewind. And when something passed, it was gone. This quietly trained the mind to stay with the moment instead of stepping outside it. But then, something changed. The world went digital, fast. People who grew up in the 1990s didn't start in that world, they entered it. They remember waiting for shows, waiting for messages, waiting for things to arrive. Psychologically, this built patience before convenience arrived to replace it. They learned that anticipation was normal, that boredom wasn't dangerous, that time passed whether you filled it or not. And that matters. Because when technology later offered instant answers, instant entertainment, instant connection, they already had an internal reference point for life without it. So they use technology, but they don't fully trust it to regulate them. If that sounds like how you relate to technology today, you'll probably recognize yourself in this next part, and I'd be curious to hear if you feel the same way. There's another important trait this generation developed: resourcefulness. Problems weren't solved by searching. They were solved by thinking, or asking, or trying and failing. Directions were figured out. Plans were made ahead of time. Mistakes weren't immediately corrected. They were learned from. And that builds a different relationship with uncertainty. Instead of panicking when things aren't clear, there's a tendency to pause and figure it out. And then there's the emotional side. People who grew up in the 1990s lived through a transition most generations don't get to witness so clearly. They saw privacy turn into visibility, silence turn into constant connection, and simplicity turn into speed. That creates psychological flexibility. They can appreciate slow moments without feeling left behind. They can adapt to fast ones without losing themselves. They're often comfortable being alone, but not isolated, connected, but not dependent, nostalgic, but not stuck. So when you talk to someone from that generation, it can feel different. They listen. They don't rush to fill silence. They don't need every moment to be optimized or shared. They remember a world that moved slower. And even though the world doesn't anymore, they carried that rhythm forward. Not as resistance to change, but as grounding. And if any of this sounds familiar, if you recognize yourself in how they relate to time, technology, or silence, you're not alone. That's what this channel is for. Because growing up in the 1990s wasn't just about a different time. It was about learning how to stand between two worlds without losing your footing in either.